Good morning, everyone. Today, we're talking about something deceptively simple: food. More specifically, the right food for seniors who want to optimize longevity, preserve muscle, stabilize energy, and critically avoid the metabolic landmines of carbohydrates and sugar. Now, let me be clear up front. Carbohydrates are not inherently evil. But when we look at the data, particularly in aging populations, we see that many seniors become increasingly insulin resistant over time. Combine that with reduced muscle mass and less metabolic flexibility, and suddenly that healthy whole wheat toast isn't doing you any favors. What we need is a dietary strategy that minimizes glycemic variability, supports lean mass retention, and enhances mitochondrial efficiency. So here are 8 of the best foods I recommend based on the literature and clinical experience for seniors who want to eliminate sugar, avoid carbs, and stay metabolically resilient. When we talk about optimizing nutrition for longevity, particularly in aging populations, the conversation inevitably turns towards simplicity. What foods actually move the needle in terms of health span and lifespan? What delivers the highest value per calorie, per gram of protein, per unit of micronutrient density? You'll often find people reaching for the latest superfood trend or exotic supplement, but sometimes the answer is much more humble: eggs. From a biochemical, physiological, and practical standpoint, eggs are arguably one of the most perfect foods available to humans. I don't say that lightly. I say it because when we examine what the body actually needs, particularly in the context of aging, we see that eggs deliver on multiple fronts: protein quality, nutrient density, metabolic neutrality, and practicality. Let's start with the most obvious metric: protein quality. As we age, we begin to experience a progressive loss of skeletal muscle mass and function, a condition known as sarcopenia. It's not just about vanity or frailty. Sarcopenia is directly correlated with increased mortality risk. Muscle is one of the most reliable predictors of survival in older adults, not just because of strength, but because of its role as a metabolic sink. It acts like a glucose buffer, improves insulin sensitivity, and provides critical amino acids during periods of stress or illness. To combat sarcopenia, we need adequate protein, but not just any protein. We need high-quality, bioavailable protein rich in essential amino acids, particularly leucine, which is the main trigger for muscle protein synthesis via the mTOR pathway. Eggs provide exactly that. A large egg contains about 6 to 7 grams of high biological value protein, and it has one of the best amino acid scores of any food. Leucine content per gram is also among the highest. In fact, the whole egg white and yolk has been used as a standard in protein quality assessments for decades. When you eat eggs, you're not just providing raw material, you're triggering a response, you're signaling the machinery of the cell to build. But protein alone doesn't tell the full story. A common trap I see in nutritional discussions is the elevation of macronutrients at the expense of micronutrients. This becomes particularly problematic in the context of aging, where nutrient absorption efficiency declines, medication use increases, and the physiological demand for certain vitamins like B12D and choline rises. Here again, eggs deliver. Take choline. It's one of the most underappreciated nutrients in public discourse, but one of the most vital for brain health, methylation, and lipid metabolism. Most older adults don't get enough, especially those avoiding animal products or egg yolks out of outdated fears around cholesterol. A single large egg yolk contains about 125 milligrams of choline, more than twice the amount found in a 3-ounce serving of salmon. Choline is a precursor to acetylcholine, a critical neurotransmitter involved in memory, attention, and muscle function. It's also required for the synthesis of phosphatidylcholine, a key component of cell membranes, especially in the liver and brain. Deficiencies in choline have been linked to fatty liver, cognitive decline, and neural tube defects. Then there's lutein and zeaxanthin, 2 carotenoids that concentrate in the retina and help protect against macular degeneration, the leading cause of vision loss in seniors. You don't need a supplement for these, you just need to eat the yolk. The bioavailability of these compounds in eggs is significantly higher than from plant sources, due to the fat matrix in which they're embedded. Again, form matters more than just quantity. Eggs are also rich in fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K2, especially if sourced from pasture-raised hens. Vitamin D, for example, is notoriously difficult to get from food alone, but eggs provide a small, meaningful contribution. More importantly, they come with the cofactors required for absorption. That matters. And yes, we need to address cholesterol. For decades, eggs were vilified because of their dietary cholesterol content, about 185 milligrams per yolk. The assumption was simple. More dietary cholesterol leads to more blood cholesterol, which leads to more cardiovascular disease. But that's not how the body works. We now understand that in most people, dietary cholesterol has a minimal impact on blood cholesterol levels, especially ApoB-containing lipoproteins, which are the real issue. The hepatic LDL receptor pathway plays a much larger role in regulating cholesterol than the breakfast you eat. In fact, for many people, eggs can actually improve lipid profiles when consumed as part of a low-carbohydrate or ketogenic dietary pattern. They increase HDL, support larger LDL particle size, and reduce triglycerides. Of course, individual variability exists. Some hyper-responders do show significant changes in lipids with egg intake, and they should be monitored. But for the vast majority of people, eggs are not the enemy. They're a misunderstood ally. Another advantage eggs offer is their effect on satiety. As we age, appetite can decline, or in some cases, shift toward more carbohydrate-heavy cravings. Eggs help control hunger. They have a high satiety index, meaning they make you feel full longer. That's partly due to their protein and fat content, but also due to their impact on gut hormones like ghrelin and peptide YY. If you're trying to manage blood glucose and avoid insulin spikes, a priority in older adults dealing with prediabetes or full-blown type 2 diabetes, starting your day with eggs instead of toast or cereal can dramatically improve postprandial glycemia. I've seen patients cut their insulin requirements in half just by replacing their breakfast with a 2-egg omelet and avocado. There's also the issue of practicality. Most of my older patients don't want a complicated food strategy. They want something they can understand, prepare quickly, chew easily, and tolerate well. Eggs check every box. They're portable, easy to cook, and digestible even in individuals with compromised dentition or gastrointestinal issues. Scrambled, poached, boiled, or as part of a frittata, eggs adapt to nearly any culinary scenario. For those on limited incomes or fixed budgets, eggs are also cost-effective. Few foods offer such a high return on investment per dollar. What about the fear of contamination or foodborne illness? It's overblown. Yes, raw or undercooked eggs can theoretically carry salmonella, but modern food safety practices have dramatically reduced that risk. If someone is immunocompromised or frail, sure, you might stick to hard-boiled or fully cooked versions, but for most, the risk is negligible, especially if you're buying from reputable sources. Let's also talk about context. In nutritional science, context is everything. If you're consuming eggs within the framework of a standard American diet, loaded with refined carbs, industrial seed oils, and ultra-processed junk, you're not going to see the benefits I'm talking about. But in the context of a nutrient-dense, carbohydrate-controlled whole food diet, eggs are a foundational pillar. They work synergistically with other longevity-promoting behaviors, resistance training, sleep optimization, and fasting protocols. When you combine those elements, you shift the trajectory of aging in a profound way. I've had patients in their 70s and 80s improve their DEXA scan lean mass, stabilize HbA1c, reduce medication load, and report better cognitive function simply by making eggs a consistent part of their diet. And they don't just feel better, they perform better, strength improves, balance improves, even mood improves thanks to increased neurotransmitter availability and stabilized blood glucose. There's one more element worth mentioning, the psychological relationship to food. Aging often comes with a narrowing of choices, dietary restrictions, medications, changes in taste or smell. Eggs offer a sense of continuity. They're familiar, comforting. There's a deep behavioral value in eating foods that feel safe and enjoyable. And from a compliance standpoint, that matters just as much as the biochemistry. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a humble food that deserves a starring role in the conversation about longevity nutrition. Not because it's trendy, not because it fits some ideological framework, but because it works. Eggs are dense in what we need more of: protein, choline, carotenoids, vitamins, and devoid of what we need less of: sugar, refined carbs, and inflammatory compounds. They help preserve lean mass, stabilize energy, support brain health, and promote satiety. They do this efficiently, inexpensively, and with remarkable reliability. It's easy to overcomplicate nutrition, especially in the context of aging. But sometimes the answer isn't another supplement or obscure superfood. Sometimes it's just eating 2 or 3 eggs and getting on with your day. That's not just nutrition, that's strategy, and for anyone serious about extending health span, it's one worth adopting. When we're talking about low-carb, zero-sugar foods that actually move the needle on metabolic health and longevity, particularly for aging populations, few are as overlooked and underappreciated as sardines. And that's unfortunate because from a nutritional density standpoint, sardines hit almost every target that matters. They're high in bioavailable protein, they're rich in long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, and they're packed with micronutrients that support cardiovascular health, bone density, immune function, and even cognitive preservation. The discussion has to start with the omega-3 content, specifically EPA and DHA. These are not the plant-based precursors like alpha-linolenic acid, ALA, which require enzymatic conversion that becomes progressively inefficient with age. We're talking about direct, ready-to-use EPA and DHA, which modulate everything from systemic inflammation to cell membrane fluidity and gene expression. Most people, even those who eat fish occasionally, don't get anywhere near optimal levels of these fats. And yet EPA and DHA are critical for reducing triglycerides, improving endothelial function, and lowering the risk of sudden cardiac death. They also exert powerful antiarrhythmic effects and help stabilize heart rate variability, which we now understand is a significant biomarker of autonomic nervous system health and resilience. Now, when we're looking at older adults, those over 60 especially, these benefits become even more clinically relevant. Inflammation increases with age. We call it inflammaging. It's subtle, chronic, and low-grade, but it's always there, and it accelerates everything from atherosclerosis to cognitive decline. EPA and DHA blunt that signal. They downregulate NF-κB, reduce pro-inflammatory cytokines, and help shift the body's lipid mediator profile toward resolution rather than propagation of inflammation. That matters, especially when someone's dealing with comorbidities like type 2 diabetes, hypertension, or metabolic syndrome. Sardines are one of the most efficient delivery systems for those fatty acids without the oxidative instability of supplements or the high mercury risk that comes with larger fish like tuna. There's also the matter of protein. Each small can of sardines, say around 3.5 ounces, contains roughly 20 to 25 grams of high-quality complete protein. And just like eggs, sardines deliver a solid dose of leucine, the amino acid trigger for muscle protein synthesis. We know that aging blunts the muscle-building response to protein, a phenomenon called anabolic resistance. So older adults don't just need more protein, they need it more often, and they need it from sources that actually move the mTOR needle. Sardines do exactly that. They're easy to chew, easy to digest, and because they're so nutrient-dense, they don't require large volumes of food to deliver the effect. Let's talk about calcium. One of the most common concerns among aging populations, particularly postmenopausal women, is osteoporosis. Bone density declines, fracture risk increases, and the standard intervention tends to be calcium supplements or dairy. But sardines offer a better, more bioavailable solution. When you eat sardines with the bones, which are soft and fully edible, you're getting a significant amount of naturally occurring calcium, but more importantly, you're getting it alongside vitamin D, phosphorus, and magnesium, cofactors required for proper calcium absorption and utilization. You're also avoiding the risks associated with calcium supplementation, which in some studies has been linked to arterial calcification and increased cardiovascular risk when taken in isolation. The micronutrient profile doesn't stop there. Sardines are rich in selenium, a powerful antioxidant that helps regenerate glutathione and protect against oxidative stress. They also provide a meaningful dose of vitamin B12, which supports methylation, red blood cell production, and neurological function. Again, all critical for aging adults who are often deficient due to decreased gastric acid production and impaired intrinsic factor function. We even see some vitamin K2, another underappreciated nutrient involved in directing calcium to bones rather than arteries. And here's something that often gets overlooked. Sardines are canned at the source, typically within hours of being caught. That means minimal processing, no time for rancidity, and very little nutrient degradation. Contrast that with many fish oils or highly processed food products where oxidation and quality control are real concerns. With sardines, you're eating a whole intact food in its natural form, with the added benefit of being shelf-stable, portable, and cost-effective. I often talk about the intersection between nutritional value and behavioral compliance. It doesn't matter how perfect a food is on paper if people won't eat it. That's where sardines have an image problem. Some people dislike the texture, others the smell, but once you understand the health ROI, the barrier becomes more psychological than physiological. My advice, start simple. Choose sardines packed in olive oil, not soybean or sunflower oil, and add them to a salad or eat them with avocado. Over time, the palate adapts. The benefits, however, are immediate and compounding. So if you're building a nutritional framework for someone in their 60s, 70s, or beyond, someone who needs to maintain lean mass, reduce inflammation, protect their brain, and keep their heart in rhythm, sardines are a food that deserves a permanent spot on the plate. Not because they're trendy or exotic, but because they work. They're metabolically quiet, biologically dense, and physiologically efficient. And when it comes to longevity, that's exactly what you want. When it comes to nutrient density, real measurable per-calorie efficiency, there are very few foods that can compete with beef liver, and yet it's one of the most neglected foods in the modern diet. We've moved so far away from ancestral eating patterns, and in doing so, we've also moved away from some of the most biochemically potent tools available to us. Beef liver isn't a trendy superfood, it's a metabolic and nutritional powerhouse that supports virtually every system in the body, especially as we age. When micronutrient demands increase and absorption efficiency decreases, liver becomes less of an optional add-on and more of a strategic intervention. Let's start with vitamin A. Not beta-carotene, the plant-based precursor that's poorly converted in many people, but true preformed retinol. Liver is the single most concentrated source of this bioavailable vitamin, which plays an essential role in vision, immune function, skin health, and gene transcription. For seniors, the implications are significant. Vitamin A deficiency is surprisingly common in older populations, particularly in those with fat malabsorption or low dietary intake of animal products. And while too much vitamin A can be toxic, this usually only occurs with chronic supplementation, not through reasonable dietary intake of whole food like liver. 1 to 2 servings per week provides ample retinol to meet physiological needs without risk of overload. Then there's B12, arguably the most critical B vitamin when it comes to aging. B12 deficiency mimics dementia. It causes fatigue, cognitive slowing, neuropathy, and even psychiatric symptoms. And here's the issue. As we age, our ability to extract B12 from food declines due to lower stomach acid and reduced intrinsic factor production. So older adults are already at higher risk of deficiency. Liver provides an extraordinarily dense source of B12, far more than muscle meat, and in a form that's immediately bioavailable. I've seen patients come off B12 injections simply by adding a few ounces of liver per week to their diet. Iron is another key player, and we're not talking about the iron you find in fortified cereals or multivitamins, often poorly absorbed and inflammatory, but heme iron, the kind the body recognizes and transports efficiently. Iron deficiency anemia is still a major issue among older adults, especially in women post-menopause or individuals with chronic GI issues, but at the same time, iron overload, particularly in men or those with hemochromatosis mutations, is a risk. That's why food-based sources like liver are superior. The iron comes packaged with cofactors like copper, vitamin A, and B12, all of which work synergistically in red blood cell production and mitochondrial respiration. Speaking of copper, liver is one of the few foods that provides it in meaningful amounts. Most people focus on iron and forget copper, but they're metabolically intertwined. Copper deficiency can actually impair iron metabolism, increase oxidative stress, and contribute to cardiovascular dysfunction. Again, liver provides this in balance, along with zinc and selenium, two more critical trace minerals for immune function, antioxidant defense, and thyroid health. Choline is another standout. It's essential for methylation, acetylcholine synthesis, liver function, and brain health. Most people don't get enough, and while eggs are another excellent source, liver contains even more per gram. This becomes especially important in older adults trying to prevent or slow neurodegeneration. Choline deficiency contributes to fatty liver, cognitive impairment, and elevated homocysteine, all risk factors for cardiovascular and neurological disease. And then we have folate. Not folic acid, which is the synthetic form added to processed foods, but natural folate in its bioactive form. Liver is one of the richest food sources, and it comes packaged with B6 and B12, the full methylation triad. This is crucial for managing homocysteine, supporting neurotransmitter synthesis, and maintaining DNA integrity. For anyone dealing with cognitive decline, mood disorders, or cardiovascular risk, folate status is not optional, it's foundational. Now, I understand that liver isn't the most appetizing food for most people. It's got a strong flavor and unusual texture, and it carries some cultural baggage. But we have to separate emotion from data, and the data is overwhelming. Just a few ounces of liver once or twice per week can correct or prevent deficiencies that would otherwise require multiple supplements, each with their own cost, compliance issues, and variability in absorption. There's a psychological threshold to get over with liver, but once you make it part of your routine, the return on investment is enormous. I've seen patients improve energy levels, stabilize mood, reverse anemia, and even improve sleep, all from reintroducing this one food. For those who absolutely can't tolerate it whole, there are desiccated liver capsules available, but I always prefer the real food version when possible. If sustainability or sourcing is a concern, grass-fed beef liver is widely available and usually very affordable, far more so than most protein supplements or so-called superfoods. Liver doesn't replace everything, but it fills a wide range of micronutrient gaps with incredible efficiency. For older adults, navigating fatigue, cognitive change, reduced resilience, and slower recovery. This is one of the most strategic additions you can make to a no-sugar, no-carb, nutrient-dense nutritional framework. It's not glamorous, but it's powerful, and in a world that's forgotten what real food can do, liver quietly continues to outperform. When you start filtering foods through the lens of metabolic health, satiety, micronutrient density, and hormonal stability, especially in older adults, you realize quickly that most of the modern food environment fails us. The average meal spikes glucose, triggers excessive insulin, fails to provide essential nutrients, and leaves you hungry again 2 hours later. But then you find foods like avocados that do the opposite. They don't spike blood sugar. They don't flood your system with glucose or seed oils. Instead, they offer a dense matrix of monounsaturated fat, fiber, and micronutrients, working in quiet but powerful ways to support the very systems that decline with age: insulin sensitivity, cardiovascular integrity, brain function, and digestive regularity. Let's start with the macronutrient composition. One medium avocado contains roughly 20 grams of fat, most of which is oleic acid, a monounsaturated fatty acid also found in olive oil. Oleic acid plays a key role in membrane fluidity and has been shown to reduce inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein. It's been studied extensively for its effects on lipoproteins, particularly for its ability to improve HDL functionality and reduce small, dense LDL particles, which are more atherogenic. For someone in their 60s or 70s looking to optimize cardiovascular health without the downside of glucose excursions or triglyceride surges, this is exactly the type of fat we want in the diet. The fat in avocados also plays an important role in nutrient absorption. Many vitamins A, D, E, and K are fat-soluble, meaning they require dietary fat for optimal uptake. Adding avocado to a salad isn't just about flavor, it significantly increases the bioavailability of carotenoids like lutein and beta-carotene. In fact, studies show up to a 15-fold increase in absorption when avocado is present compared to when it isn't. That matters, especially for aging adults trying to maintain visual acuity, neurological resilience, and immune function. But what makes avocado unique even more than its fat profile is the combination of high fiber and extremely low glycemic load. A single avocado delivers about 13 to 14 grams of fiber, with the majority coming from insoluble forms that add bulk and support motility, along with soluble fibers that serve as prebiotics fuel for the gut microbiota. We now understand that gut health intersects with nearly every system in the body. Short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, produced when gut bacteria ferment soluble fiber, play roles in inflammation control, gut barrier integrity, and even brain function via the gut-brain axis, and yet the average older adult consumes far less than the recommended fiber intake, which contributes to everything from constipation and dysbiosis to glucose intolerance and elevated LDL. Avocados fill that gap without the trade-off. Most high-fiber foods are also high in carbohydrates: beans, oats, whole grains. While those might work for younger insulin-sensitive individuals, they're often problematic for older adults with impaired glucose tolerance or outright insulin resistance. Avocados deliver the fiber without the glycemic penalty. Their impact on postprandial glucose is effectively neutral, and in many cases, adding avocado to a carbohydrate-containing meal blunts the glucose response of the entire meal due to delayed gastric emptying and modulation of gut hormones like GIP and GLP-1. And then there's potassium, a mineral most people associate with bananas, but which is found in far greater concentration in avocados. One avocado provides around 700 to 900 milligrams of potassium, which is crucial for blood pressure regulation, nerve conduction, and muscle contraction. High potassium intake, especially relative to sodium, is consistently associated with lower cardiovascular risk. This becomes even more important in aging populations where arterial stiffness increases and the risk of hypertension escalates. Avocados provide that potassium in a food matrix that supports rather than undermines metabolic control. Magnesium is another critical micronutrient delivered in meaningful amounts by avocados. It's a cofactor in more than 300 enzymatic reactions, including those involved in glucose regulation, mitochondrial function, and protein synthesis. Magnesium deficiency is rampant in the general population, especially among older adults, due to both lower dietary intake and increased renal excretion with age. The downstream effects are serious: insulin resistance, arrhythmias, muscle cramps, even sleep disruption. Adding a food like avocado helps restore balance naturally without needing another pill. One more thing to consider is compliance. Dietary interventions only work when they're sustainable. Older adults often face barriers to consistency, reduced appetite, dentition issues, medication-induced nausea, or even food fatigue. Avocados are soft, palatable, and versatile. They can be eaten alone, mashed, spread, added to salads or smoothies, or paired with protein like eggs or salmon to create a complete metabolically sound meal. They're also satiating thanks to the fat and fiber combination, which helps prevent grazing and supports caloric control without the sense of deprivation. What avocados don't contain is just as important: no added sugar, no starch, no seed oils, and no anti-nutrients in significant concentrations. That clean profile makes them particularly useful in nutritional strategies aimed at reversing insulin resistance, supporting cardiovascular health, or simply optimizing aging physiology. In a food landscape where most items either harm metabolic health or do nothing to support it, avocados stand out. They're nutrient-dense without being energy-dense, they're low glycemic without being restrictive, and they provide foundational support for systems that need the most help as we age. In a well-designed, carb-restricted, nutrient-focused diet for longevity, they're not optional, they're strategic. When we talk about nutritional interventions that measurably impact longevity, not just lifespan but health span, wild-caught salmon belongs high on that list. It's not hyperbole to call it longevity in a fillet. It checks almost every box we care about: dense in long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, high in bioavailable protein, rich in micronutrients, low in toxins, and uniquely effective in countering several mechanisms of aging, from inflammation and mitochondrial decline to cognitive deterioration and cardiovascular dysfunction. And for older adults, specifically those trying to preserve muscle mass, cognition, and metabolic flexibility without driving glycemic load, wild-caught salmon may be one of the most efficient tools we have. Start with the omega-3 profile. Wild-caught salmon is one of the richest dietary sources of EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, two long-chain fatty acids that play central roles in reducing inflammation, modulating cell signaling, and maintaining the structural integrity of neuronal and mitochondrial membranes. EPA is a potent anti-inflammatory compound. It acts as a precursor to resolvins and protectins, lipid mediators that actively resolve inflammation rather than just suppressing it. DHA, on the other hand, is critical for neuronal function, impacting everything from synaptic plasticity to the prevention of neurodegenerative processes like beta-amyloid aggregation. For an aging adult, this is not a nice-to-have. This is essential for protecting the brain and cardiovascular system against the two biggest threats to quality of life. There's also a profound cardiovascular benefit to regular intake of fatty fish like wild salmon. Numerous studies, including large-scale prospective cohort studies and randomized trials, have demonstrated that higher EPA and DHA intake is associated with reduced triglyceride levels, improved endothelial function, lower resting heart rate, and decreased risk of sudden cardiac death. Importantly, these effects appear even more pronounced in older adults and those with metabolic syndrome, likely because they're starting with higher levels of baseline inflammation and worse lipid profiles. Unlike statins, which operate through a very specific and sometimes problematic mechanism, omega-3s exert systemic effects without compromising muscle function, glucose metabolism, or mitochondrial output. Now let's talk protein. One 6-ounce fillet of wild-caught salmon provides roughly 35 to 40 grams of complete, highly bioavailable protein, enough to meet or exceed the anabolic threshold for stimulating muscle protein synthesis in most older adults, especially when paired with resistance training. As we age, we become less responsive to protein, a phenomenon known as anabolic resistance. That means we don't just need adequate protein, we need strategically timed high-quality protein sources that provide sufficient leucine and other essential amino acids to overcome that resistance and maintain lean mass. Wild salmon delivers on that without the insulinogenic spike that comes from carbohydrate-based meals or the inflammatory baggage of processed meats. But the story doesn't end at protein and fat. Wild salmon is an underappreciated source of critical micronutrients, particularly selenium, B12, vitamin D, and astaxanthin. Selenium is essential for glutathione peroxidase function, supporting antioxidant defenses and thyroid regulation. B12 is foundational for methylation, neurological health, and red blood cell formation, especially crucial in seniors where intrinsic factor production often drops. Vitamin D, as we know, is not just a vitamin but a hormone with widespread effects on immune regulation, bone health, and even mood. And then there's astaxanthin, a carotenoid found in wild salmon but not farmed, that has potent antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties, protecting lipids from oxidation and supporting mitochondrial function in high-energy demand tissues like the brain, heart, and muscles. Another key point, wild-caught salmon is a low-toxin food. Unlike farmed salmon, which often contains residues of antibiotics, PCBs, and is artificially colored, wild salmon is cleaner, naturally pigmented by astaxanthin, and raised in the environment it evolved in. That matters. If you're eating a food for longevity, you want the full spectrum of benefits without the chronic exposure to compounds that degrade mitochondrial function or impair detoxification pathways. And compliance, always a necessary filter in any nutrition plan, is surprisingly high with salmon. It's palatable, versatile, and easy to prepare. It's not a chore to eat. Most people enjoy it grilled, baked, or even raw as sashimi. That makes it more than theoretically optimal. It makes it practically sustainable. You don't need to convince someone to eat it for years on end. You just need to create the habit and build it into a rotation. A couple of servings per week is enough to tilt omega-3 status in the right direction, support protein intake, and fill in key micronutrient gaps. So when I think about what food I would include in the diet of a 70-year-old trying to maintain functional capacity into their 80s and 90s, wild-caught salmon consistently makes the list. Not just because it's anti-inflammatory or cardioprotective, though it is. Not just because it supports cognition, though it does. But because it's one of the few foods that actively resists the entropy of aging across multiple systems simultaneously. In other words, it's not just good, it's efficient. It does a lot of work per calorie, per gram, and per bite. That's the kind of food that earns a place in the longevity toolbox. If we're serious about reducing the burden of chronic disease, specifically cardiovascular disease, neurodegeneration, and systemic inflammation, then we need to pay close attention to the fats we're consuming. Not all fats are created equal, and not all oils are beneficial despite what marketing might imply. In fact, the overwhelming presence of ultra-processed seed oils, high in linoleic acid and prone to oxidation, has done immense harm over the past century. Against this backdrop, extra virgin olive oil stands out not just as a lesser evil, but as a uniquely beneficial compound. It's not a neutral ingredient, it's actively therapeutic, particularly for the aging vascular system. To understand why, let's start with olive oil's molecular architecture. The primary fatty acid in extra virgin olive oil, EVOO, is oleic acid, a monounsaturated fat that is incredibly resistant to oxidation compared to the polyunsaturated linoleic acid found in most seed oils. That resistance to oxidation is not a trivial detail. Oxidized lipids are highly atherogenic. They damage endothelial cells, impair nitric oxide signaling, and promote plaque formation. So from a cardiovascular standpoint, consuming fats that are more stable under heat and within the body's oxidative environment is one of the first principles. Olive oil checks that box. But the benefits go well beyond stability. Extra virgin olive oil contains an entire matrix of bioactive compounds, polyphenols like oleocanthal, hydroxytyrosol, and oleuropein, that have profound effects on inflammation, endothelial function, and lipid metabolism. Oleocanthal, for example, has been shown to act as a natural COX inhibitor, mimicking the anti-inflammatory effects of ibuprofen, but without the gastrointestinal side effects. This is not subtle. These compounds have been observed to downregulate NF-κB signaling, one of the master regulators of inflammation. Chronic low-grade inflammation, what some refer to as inflammaging, is a hallmark of almost every major age-related disease. So foods that directly modulate that pathway aren't just healthy in a vague sense, they're mechanistically targeted. The cardiovascular implications of regular olive oil consumption are particularly compelling. Look at the data from the PREDMEN trial, a large randomized controlled trial out of Spain that specifically evaluated the effects of a Mediterranean diet enriched with extra virgin olive oil. Participants in the EVOO group experienced a 30% relative risk reduction in major cardiovascular events compared to those on a low-fat diet. And we're not just talking about surrogate markers like LDL-C. This was actual reductions in heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular deaths. And while LDL cholesterol tends to get all the attention, It's worth remembering that what actually matters is the particle number LDLP, particle size, and oxidation state. Olive oil doesn't just leave LDLC unchanged, it appears to reduce small dense LDL particles, increase HDL functionality, and improve postprandial lipemia. The net effect is a more favorable lipoprotein profile and reduced atherogenic risk. In older adults who often exhibit increased insulin resistance and dyslipidemia, even in the absence of overt disease, this is a meaningful dietary lever. Then there's blood pressure. EVOO contains compounds that enhance endothelial nitric oxide production and improve arterial compliance. Clinical studies have shown that regular consumption of high polyphenol olive oil can reduce systolic and diastolic blood pressure in hypertensive individuals, an effect comparable to low-dose pharmaceutical interventions, but achieved through dietary means. For someone in their 60s or 70s, managing blood pressure without relying solely on medication is not just about numbers, it's about side effects, quality of life, and maintaining autonomy. Another underappreciated area is olive oil's effect on cognition. The brain is particularly vulnerable to oxidative stress due to its high lipid content and metabolic activity. Several observational and interventional studies suggest that diets rich in EVOO are associated with slower cognitive decline, improved memory, and reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease. Again, polyphenols like oleuropein appear to play a key role, reducing amyloid plaque formation, enhancing autophagy, and mitigating neuroinflammation. This is an important consideration because cognitive decline doesn't begin when symptoms appear, it often begins decades earlier. So, incorporating olive oil into a diet starting in midlife or earlier is a strategic move for brain longevity. Now, an important nuance: not all olive oil is created equal. The benefits are most concentrated in fresh, cold-pressed, extra virgin olive oil that has been properly stored and minimally processed. Once you start refining olive oil, exposing it to heat, stripping away the polyphenols, you're left with a product that resembles most other neutral oils on the shelf. So quality matters. If you're consuming olive oil for its health-promoting effects, you want to prioritize varieties that are high in polyphenols, usually over 300 milligrams/kil, stored in dark bottles and ideally harvested and bottled within the last year. The flavor intensity, often a bit peppery or bitter, isn't just a culinary feature, it's a sign of high polyphenol content. People often ask how much is optimal. While there's no one-size-fits-all number, studies suggest that somewhere in the range of 2 to 4 tablespoons per day provides measurable benefits. This isn't difficult to achieve if you're using olive oil liberally on salads, vegetables, and protein sources. It's calorically dense, yes, but it's also profoundly satiating, and unlike seed oils, it doesn't contribute to metabolic dysregulation. Olive oil isn't a silver bullet, but in the context of a nutrient-dense, carb-controlled, protein-sufficient diet, it is one of the most metabolically supportive fats you can consume. For aging adults especially, where the goals are reducing inflammation, protecting vascular integrity, supporting cognition, and preserving muscle mass, EVOO plays a central role. It's not just a passive ingredient, it's an active agent of health. And in a dietary landscape crowded with misleading claims and processed options, extra virgin olive oil remains one of the few truly time-tested, mechanistically sound interventions we can rely on. When evaluating food choices for older adults, especially those dealing with insulin resistance, declining mitochondrial efficiency, or increased vulnerability to inflammation, you need to optimize for several things at once. You want nutrient density without a glucose spike. You want to feed the gut without feeding metabolic disease. You want bulk without burden. And non-starchy vegetables accomplish that in a way very few food groups can. They deliver fiber, both soluble and insoluble, while offering a negligible glycemic impact, virtually zero fructose load, and a broad array of vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals that support health at the cellular level. In short, they're low risk, high yield. But let's be precise. When I say non-starchy vegetables, I'm referring to plants like leafy greens, spinach, arugula, kale, cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and things like zucchini, asparagus, celery, cucumbers, and peppers. These foods typically contain fewer than 5 grams of net carbohydrates per 100 grams, making them metabolically safe even for individuals with compromised glucose handling. One of the primary reasons to emphasize these vegetables is fiber, not fiber as a vague feel-good concept, but fiber as a biologically active substrate. Insoluble fiber adds mechanical bulk, improving intestinal transit and reducing the risk of constipation, a very real and often under-discussed issue in older adults. More importantly, soluble fiber functions as a prebiotic. It feeds the microbiota in the colon, which in turn produce short-chain fatty acids, SCFAs like butyrate, propionate, and acetate. These SCFAs are not inert waste products. They act as signaling molecules. Butyrate in particular has been shown to support colonocyte health, reduce systemic inflammation, and modulate immune function. This isn't just about digestive health. It's about maintaining a low inflammatory tone throughout the body, which becomes more difficult but more critical with age. It's also worth noting what these vegetables don't contain. They are essentially devoid of fructose. That's important. While fructose from whole fruit is not inherently problematic in small quantities, it still needs to be processed in the liver and in higher amounts can contribute to hepatic fat accumulation and de novo lipogenesis, particularly in insulin-resistant individuals. Non-starchy vegetables bypass that issue entirely. They offer micronutrients without requiring any hepatic metabolic cost. This becomes more relevant in older adults, many of whom already exhibit signs of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD, often without even knowing it. And what about the fear of anti-nutrients in vegetables, things like oxalates, lectins, or phytates? That concern, while not entirely unfounded, is dramatically overblown in the context of a well-constructed diet. For most people, particularly those without autoimmune issues or severe GI disorders, the net benefit of consuming non-starchy vegetables far outweighs any theoretical downside from anti-nutrient exposure. Cooking methods like steaming or sautéing reduce many of these compounds anyway, and for aging adults who often need more, not fewer micronutrients, the cost-benefit analysis tilts clearly in favor of inclusion. Let's get into micronutrient density. Leafy greens like spinach and Swiss chard provide folate, magnesium, and potassium, three nutrients that are commonly deficient in older populations. Folate supports methylation and neurological function. Magnesium is a cofactor in over 300 enzymatic reactions, including those that regulate insulin sensitivity and energy production. Potassium is critical for blood pressure regulation and muscle contraction. The levels of these nutrients in a serving of sautéed greens aren't just additive, they're meaningful, especially when considered in the context of a diet that's otherwise low in processed food and added sugars. Cruciferous vegetables, like broccoli and cauliflower, offer another layer of benefit through compounds like sulforaphane and indole-3-carbinol. These phytochemicals have been shown to activate phase 2 detoxification enzymes, support glutathione production, and may even exert anti-cancer effects through epigenetic modulation. For someone in their 60s or 70s concerned about oxidative stress, carcinogenesis, or simply maintaining cellular resilience, these compounds act like microscopic biochemical armor. There's also the satiety factor. Non-starchy vegetables provide volume, literally. That's not just good for appetite regulation, it's critical for helping older adults achieve satiety on fewer calories without feeling restricted. This is especially useful in the context of a ketogenic or low-carb diet, where energy-dense foods can sometimes lead to a lack of perceived fullness. Adding a large salad or a side of sautéed vegetables helps solve that problem without introducing any metabolic downside. Now, some people argue that vegetables are optional, especially in the carnivore or zero-carb communities. I think that's the wrong lens, particularly for older adults. The goal isn't to simply avoid harm, it's to actively build resilience. While it's true that animal products provide many essential nutrients with high bioavailability, non-starchy vegetables contribute a different set of assets: fiber for gut health, polyphenols for inflammation control, and micronutrients that are often missing in aging physiology. They're not redundant, they're complementary. So how much is enough? I don't think there's a single number, but generally a few cups per day spread across different types and colors is a good target. Aim for variety, some cruciferous, some leafy, some colorful like peppers or radishes. Rotate your selections to avoid overexposure to any one compound and to diversify your nutrient intake. Preparation matters too. Steaming, roasting, sautéing, and extra virgin olive oil, all are good options. Raw is fine if well tolerated, but cooking can enhance digestibility and reduce anti-nutrient load. And pairing vegetables with healthy fats like olive oil or avocado not only improves flavor, but also enhances absorption of fat-soluble vitamins and carotenoids. It's not about eating vegetables for the sake of eating vegetables, it's about using them strategically in combinations and contexts that maximize their utility. Non-starchy vegetables don't do one thing. They do many things quietly in the background. They don't spike glucose, they don't feed disease, they don't crowd out more important macronutrients. They support gut integrity, provide micronutrients, lower inflammatory tone, and enhance satiety. In a dietary pattern built for longevity where the goal is to slow the entropy of aging across every system, they are one of the most efficient tools we have. Not because they're trendy, but because they're mechanistically sound. When we think about dietary priorities for aging adults, especially those focused on preserving lean mass, optimizing mitochondrial function, and maintaining metabolic flexibility, high-quality protein sits at the top of the list. The older you get, the harder it becomes to maintain muscle tissue due to something called anabolic resistance, a blunted response of muscle protein synthesis (MPS) to dietary protein. In practical terms, this means that older adults need more protein per meal than younger people to achieve the same anabolic response. So the conversation about protein sources becomes crucial, not just how much, but what kind. Enter pasture-raised eggs, often underrated because of outdated cholesterol fear-mongering. Eggs, specifically those from pasture-raised hens, are a nearly perfect protein source for aging individuals. They contain all 9 essential amino acids in ideal proportions for human needs, and they come packaged with a host of other nutrients that are rarely found together in such bioavailable form. One large egg has about 6 to 7 grams of protein, but it's not just the quantity that matters, it's the quality. Egg protein is considered a gold standard for biological value (BV), meaning it's exceptionally well utilized by the body. Leucine, the amino acid most responsible for triggering muscle protein synthesis via the mTOR pathway, is particularly abundant. And remember, older individuals need around 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine per meal to overcome anabolic resistance. That's roughly what you'd get from consuming 4 to 5 whole eggs, a realistic, satiating, and highly efficient meal. But eggs are more than just a protein delivery system. The yolks, often demonized in the low-fat era, are dense with micronutrients critical for aging physiology. You get choline, which supports acetylcholine synthesis and hepatic function. This is particularly relevant because choline deficiency is common in older adults and contributes to fatty liver and cognitive decline. You also get vitamin D, lutein, and zeaxanthin, nutrients with neuroprotective and ophthalmologic benefits. The latter two are especially concentrated in pasture-raised eggs because the hens forage for a natural diet rich in carotenoids. These compounds accumulate in the retina and protect against age-related macular degeneration, one of the leading causes of vision loss in older populations. Another key point is cholesterol. Specifically, the cholesterol in eggs is not the villain it's been made out to be. Dietary cholesterol has a minimal effect on serum cholesterol in most people, and for many older adults, higher dietary cholesterol correlates with better hormone production, membrane integrity, and cognitive function. In fact, in the context of low inflammation and low glycemic load, cholesterol metabolism becomes far less problematic. We have to stop thinking in reductionist terms. One nutrient equals one outcome. The context always matters. Now let's be clear, not all eggs are created equal. The difference between conventional, battery-caged eggs and pasture-raised eggs is substantial, not just ethically but nutritionally. Pasture-raised eggs have higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids, more vitamin E, and significantly greater antioxidant content. The fatty acid profile alone, specifically a higher ratio of anti-inflammatory omega-3s to omega-6s, justifies the upgrade. But what about those times when whole food isn't practical? Maybe you're intermittent fasting and want to hit a protein target without a full meal. Or maybe you're post-exercise and need a fast-digesting source to stimulate muscle repair. That's where whey protein isolate comes in, not as a replacement for whole food, but as a strategic tool. Whey isolate is arguably the most efficient protein source for triggering muscle protein synthesis, particularly in older adults. It has an exceptionally high leucine content, around 2.5 grams serving, and is rapidly absorbed. That speed of digestion matters post-training when the body is primed to rebuild tissue. Unlike casein or whole milk protein, whey isolate clears the gut and hits the bloodstream quickly, spiking amino acid concentrations and maximizing the MPS response. It's also remarkably low in carbs and fat, ideal for those trying to avoid glycemic excursions. A high-quality isolate will have less than 1 gram of lactose per serving, making it digestible even for those with lactose sensitivity. Importantly, we're not talking about whey concentrate or blends with added sugars or fillers. You want a third-party tested, cold-processed isolate with minimal ingredients, just the protein, ideally nothing else. Whey isolate is also insulinogenic, but in a useful way. It triggers insulin, yes, but insulin is not the enemy. It's a nutrient signaling hormone. When paired with resistance training and consumed in a low glucose environment, a transient spike in insulin can be highly anabolic and facilitate nutrient partitioning into muscle rather than adipose tissue. This is part of the metabolic advantage of protein. It supports lean mass retention without contributing to insulin resistance or fat gain, particularly when carb intake is kept in check. So where does this leave us? For older adults aiming to maintain strength, preserve independence, and delay the onset of frailty, consistent high-quality protein intake, ideally in 3 well-distributed meals per day, is non-negotiable. Pasture-raised eggs offer a highly bioavailable, nutrient-dense, low-carb package of protein with built-in neuroprotective and anti-inflammatory benefits. They should be a staple. But in those moments when whole food isn't ideal or when precise protein dosing is required, whey isolate serves as a highly effective adjunct. This isn't about eating like a bodybuilder, it's about training and feeding the aging body like a performance machine, because it is. Protein is the cornerstone of that strategy, and both pasture-raised eggs and whey isolate are tools that deliver disproportionately large returns for their caloric cost. They help you fight sarcopenia, stabilize glucose, support cognition, and stay metabolically agile. In other words, they help you stay in the game longer, stronger, and sharper.